Hi, it's Margaret, and thank you so much for joining me here on this very chilly day. I think it's almost freezing, it's hovering around freezing on the gardening me. Yeah, the tide has turned on the weather. So, all those warm days, yeah, not so much right now, but it is not too cold to speak with you outdoors. So, that's what I decided to do. Today I am sowing some celosia and I am going to grow that's right, seven different varieties of celosia. I have them all right here. What I thought I would do, firstly, is talk about the different varieties that I'm growing. Some I have grown before, and a few are new to me. So let's go through these, and then I'm gonna go inside and get to sowing those seeds. So the first few that I'll be talking about, I did grow last year, and some were amazing, and others, not so much. But I will still be growing a couple that were not that great last year because I'm thinking that some of it may have been to do with where I had them in the garden. There were a couple of spots that I put them in where one was kind of shaded by other plants and another one was just in a rather shady part of the garden beside my shed. And I'm thinking that's why it didn't do that well. Let me just go through, actually, I'll talk about, whoops, everything was flying. I'll talk about the very first one here that was my absolute favorite. So it's kind of funny because the varieties that I was really super excited about were actually the ones that didn't really do that well last year. And then this variety, which I thought looked really pretty and everything, but it wasn't kind of at the top of the list, ended up being phenomenal. I loved it so much. And it's definitely a keeper. I think this one is one I'm probably going to grow every year. And it is called Rainbow Sherbet. And it is a variety I got from Baker Creek last year. Now, this one has a huge range of colors. I mean, we're talking from lime green to peaches and pinks, and it was just so gorgeous. It's kind of a medium-sized variety. It grows 18 to 30 inches tall. In my garden, I think in the spot I had it, it got to be about 24 inches tall or so. So it's more or less smack dab in the middle of the range that it gives on the packet. So the next one that I grew last year that didn't really do so well, and it was one I was super excited about, is this guy here, Flamingo Pink. And this is a relatively short variety. It grows between 24 and 40 inches tall. In my garden, it barely hit 18 inches, I think. Like I said, I think it had a lot to do with the spot that I put it in. Now, I did see this variety at the William Dam Trial Gardens, and it did a lot better in their gardens. And that is why I am going to give it another go. I'm really hoping that this one does well in the garden this year because I can see how those pale blooms are really versatile, especially as a cut flower. So the next one, let me dig through here. And I have a couple of packets of this one that I thought was going to do really well, that in the photos is amazing, is this Asian garden Celosia. And again, this one did not do well. This is the one I kind of planted in the beds, and I think it barely topped out at 12 inches. The flowers, again, are sort of bicolor, but they have these very, very deep magenta tones, and it's just gorgeous. This one is supposed to grow 31 to 40 inches tall. So again, I'm really hoping this one does well. I mean, all of these Celosias I'm super excited about, but it's kind of a drag when you buy something that looks so great and then it just doesn't work out. So I'm definitely going to be switching up the spot I put this one in. And in fact, I'm thinking I may even do a few in a raised bed kind of situation, which in my garden is sort of like the primo situation, just to see what it can do. So there's a helicopter going by. Let's just wait for a minute. Okay, so the next variety is called Xantippe. And again, this is one I saw at the Trial Gardens, and it was gorgeous. And one of the things that really stood out to me for this variety was the lovely contrast between the very pale pink flowers and the much darker foliage. Oh, great. Now it's going over me. Hold on. Let's see if I can get it. I don't know what it's doing. It's like circling the area or something. And we're back. So, Xanthippe. I am going to try this one in the border because I think that that contrast between the leaves and the flowers is so beautiful. It's something that I kind of want to see in the actual bed instead of, just using it as a picked flower. This one is also a relatively short one, so it's probably not the best to use as a cut flower. It only grows 12 to 16 inches tall, so it'll definitely be a front of the border plant. So the next one I have is this guy, and this is Pampas Plume Tall Blend. Now, this one I did grow last year, but it was a huge failure. I got 0 blooms. And why is that, you ask? Well, I ended up planting it in one of my beds on the front of the house, and that bed has some serious issues. I honestly don't know what it is. When I plant anything in that bed, it just doesn't do well. And I'm really hoping to remedy that this year. It's kind of going to be one of the projects on my list. So I have no idea what this one actually looks like in real life, so to speak. But I am going to try it again. And this time I am not going to be planting it in that bed. I'm going to be putting it somewhere else in the garden. This one is 30 to 40 inches tall. So it's, relatively tall. So the next one I'm going to be trying this year is this guy here, and it's called Flamma Orange, and it is an All-America Selections winner from 2022. Now, what made this variety stand out is that it stood up really well to hot, humid, and rainy conditions. As well, it flowers a little bit earlier than other varieties, and the flowers themselves don't fade as they age. This is going to be a fun one to try. And the last one is, I think, probably out of all the varieties I've mentioned, the one that I'm kind of most excited about trying this year and seeing what it's like. It is also an All-America Selections winner, and this is a winner for 2024, so for this year, and it is called Burning Embers. It looks gorgeous. Now, the plants themselves are supposed to be stocky and heavily branching with green foliage that has a bronze cast, which, I love leaves that have that kind of bronzy reddish cast to them. They just look so beautiful. This one is also a tall one. This one gets from 32 to 52 inches. So it kind of surprises me when it's being described as stocky, because normally stocky plants are short, right? Like kind of short, and so I'm wondering what this is going to look like as a stocky plant that's that tall. Super, super excited. And those are all the varieties that I will be sowing today. So I am going to go inside, probably have a nice warm cup of something, maybe coffee, maybe tea. Have to decide when I'm in there. And once I do that, I am going to get sowing. Here we are inside. I've warmed up just a little bit. And here are the varieties that I'll be growing. Now, what I have done ahead of time is made all of my little tags here. And I also put down the details about how tall each of them is and how far apart to plant them. I'll write on the tag so that when I go to plant them outside later on in early summer, then I will have that information at the ready, and I won't be kind of scrambling to look things up on the computer for every single variety to see how tall is it, do I put it in the back or in the front, that kind of thing. I have the soil here that I'll be using, seed starting mix. This is Pro Mix HP. I've already pre-moistened it so that it's damp enough to kind of hold together like that, but not sopping wet. And it's all good to go. The containers I'll be using are these guys here. These are about 2 inches this way and 3 inches across, and they're little 3-cell packs. I only got these this year, this particular size, and I really, really like them. I find I've been using them quite a lot. So let me fill up my containers with soil first. I'll fill all of my containers at once, so that way I only have to clean off my hands before handling the seeds one time as well. Instead of filling, cleaning my hands, sowing, filling, cleaning my hands, sowing. It's a lot quicker this way. Celosia is surface sown, so you don't really need a lot of room at the top there when you're sowing them. This year, I'm actually going to be doing a little bit of an experiment on how early to sow these. Last year, I did sow them at around this time, and I kind of felt as if I should actually be sowing them a little later. I found they got a little too big too quickly, and they could have really benefited from being potted up a second time. I believe I potted them up the first time about a month or so after I sowed the seeds, and they were pretty much bursting out of the pots by the time I got them into the garden in the second half of May. So this year I thought I would experiment a little bit with timing. I am sowing them at the exact same time as I did last year, and what I think I might end up doing is potting them up twice. So once at the around 3-week mark even. I think I'm going to do it a little earlier than last year, and then again maybe 3 weeks after that to a slightly bigger pot. And I'm also going to pick maybe 2 varieties and sow those again in a couple of weeks. So it's a little bit later, and I'll only be potting up once before putting them outside. The benefit, of course, of sowing a little bit later is that I only have to go through the trouble of potting them up once. And in addition to that, when I pot them up the second time, they'll be in bigger pots, which also takes up more room under the grow lights, meaning less room for other things. So if I find that the difference between an earlier and a later sowing really isn't that much, and they essentially catch up to each other within a week or two, then I'll know for a fact that it's just as good sowing the seeds later on and saving that space under the grow lights, and also not having to take care of them indoors for as long. So the first one I'm going to do is Asian garden, and basically, of course, the method will be the same for all of them. So I'll show you a more detailed view of how I do this first one, and then I will just carry on and do all the rest. Now, if it's a fresh pack of seed, I will sow 2 seeds per cell, and I may add an additional seed in one of the cells just in case something doesn't germinate. But in this case, for the Asian garden, I did sow this one last year, and I did make a note that only half of them ended up germinating. So I sowed 12 seeds last year and only 6 germinated. So in this case, I am going to double the number of seeds that I sow. So instead of 2 seeds per cell, I'm going to sow 4 seeds per cell. And hopefully that turns out okay. My goal is to get at least 6 seedlings per each of these containers. So I'm going to put the label in, and also I'm making sure that the surface of the soil is relatively flat and even, because these are pretty tiny in terms of the size of the seeds. So let's take a quick look at these seeds before I sow them. They're really, really tiny and shiny. Very cute. As I said, I'm going to take 4 seeds and sow them in each cell. And I'm going to leave a bit of space in between each of the seeds. So I'm kind of going 1, 2, 3, 4, that kind of thing. That'll make it a lot easier when I'm separating them to pot them up. Now, I put the seeds on. I'm going to give them a little spray. And that just makes sure that the seeds are moist and they have some good soil to seed contact. And then the very last bit is adding some vermiculite on top. Now, as I mentioned, these are surface sown, meaning the seeds rest right on the surface of the soil. And the reason why that is because Celosia seed needs light in order to germinate. So you don't bury it at all. But you do add a very fine coating of vermiculite because that will allow the light to penetrate to those seeds, but it'll also help the top of the soil retain moisture. Because what you don't want is for the soil and the seeds there to dry out. A little bit of a spray to moisten the vermiculite. And last but not least, I am just going to put it in a little container here. This will just sit in the water just to absorb as much water as possible, and then it'll go under the grow lights. So usually that's around 10 minutes or so that it'll sit there in that water. Okay, and now I am going to carry on with the rest of them. As I mentioned, for the ones where I had not the best germination, I will be doing a few more seeds per cell, around 4. But for ones like this one, which is the one I'm doing next, the Xantippe, this one is only going to get 2 seeds per cell. I'll also sow 1 or 2 extra seeds, just in case I don't get 100% germination. And here is the last step, and that is to put it under the grow lights here. Now this tray is on a heat mat, and the heat mat is set to 24 degrees, and that is 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And I am just going to put the cover on like that. And yeah, that's it. Now these should germinate in around 3 to 5 days. And once that happens, they come out of this tray, no more heat mat, no more cover, and they just go under the lights. And I will likely be potting them up in around 3 or 4 weeks to a 2.5-inch pot. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Bye.